The red sands of Eltraxis shimmered beneath twin suns, casting jagged shadows from the burned-out hulls of armored transports. Smoke curled lazily from the scorched ground, hanging thick in the air like a memory that refused to fade. The war had not yet reached its crescendo, but the tension vibrated through the soil, felt more than heard, like the prelude to a storm. Sergeant Zal, a veteran of the Krivarn Ascendancy, surveyed the battlefield through his optic visor. His exosuit hummed with idle power, a sleek fusion of organic alloys and energy cores. Around him, his unit lounged against rocks and shattered metal, their weapons powered down, their expressions dripping with boredom and condescension. Humans, one of them snorted, peeling back his helmet to expose translucent blue skin and eyes that glittered with disdain. Still using combustion rifles. You'd think they were fighting insects, not the galaxy's finest. A chorus of chuckles followed, harsh and metallic. Zal allowed a faint grin to tug at the corner of his mouth. Their confidence was earned. 10 campaigns and countless victories across 6 systems. The Ascendancy's tech dwarfed anything the humans could field. Their ships were faster, their weapons cleaner, more precise. And their strategy, at least in Zal's opinion, was elegant. Humans, by contrast, were crude, improvisational. They fought like they lived. Messy, unrefined, yet maddeningly persistent. He turned as a junior officer approached, antennae twitching nervously. Sergeant, reports say the humans are deploying another ground team in Sector 9G minimal armor. No drones, just infantry. Zal raised a brow ridge. That's the 3rd one this cycle. Are they hoping sheer stubbornness will dent our walls? Maybe they're out of options, the officer offered, half joking. Or out of imagination. Zal returned his gaze to the horizon, where a dust cloud hinted at movement. Either way, let them come. Meanwhile, miles below the ridgeline, the human strike team disembarked with practiced efficiency. Captain Mason Hale dropped into the sand with a grunt, boots sinking slightly into the heat-softened earth. His team fanned out in silence, the sun glinting off their worn armor plates. Mason's face was weathered, more from stress than age, and his eyes were the hard gray of a man who had lost too much to care about pretense. At his side, Corporal Yara Singh slung her old bolt-action rifle over his shoulder and muttered, "They're still laughing at us, aren't they?" Mason gave her a thin smile. Let them. Laughter makes people careless. The team's gear was an odd mix. Laser carbines rigged to scavenge cooling cells, antique weapons refurbished with modern scopes, and one massive crate reinforced with shock padding. Mason motioned toward it, and 2 soldiers dragged it onto the open path. No one spoke of what it carried. Not yet. Yara knelt beside a boulder and began setting up her scope. 3 sentry units on the north ridge. They're watching for tanks. We're sending boots. They'll assume we're insane, said Private Rodriguez, brushing sand from the legs of his exosuit. We are, Mason said quietly, just not the way they think. He opened a tablet and reviewed the terrain overlay, the lines of engagement drawn like fragile threads across the hills. They weren't here to win a traditional battle. That would be suicide. This mission was about disrupting patterns, seeding doubt, proving a point. The crate behind him was a symbol as much as a weapon. The Ascendancy had grown complacent, lazy in its victories, addicted to its own mythology of superiority. Mason intended to remind them of a truth old as war itself. In combat, certainty was a liability. A deep hum vibrated through the ground, the telltale signature of enemy aerial patrols. Mason looked up, saw the sleek shadow of a Krivarn flyer slice through the sky like a shard of obsidian. It didn't stop, didn't even slow, just passed overhead, disinterested. They think we're ants, Yara muttered, sighting down her scope. We're the boot, Mason replied. On the ridge, Zal watched the movement through magnification lenses, lips curled in amusement. No armor, no air support, no mechanized division. Just bodies. They bring bodies like offerings. It's tragic, really. His lieutenant, Frelk, smirked. Maybe they're trying to insult us. Waving relics like those ancient projectile rifles. I saw one with a wooden stock. Zal! Wood. The laughter returned, rolling like a wave. But it was thinner this time, touched with something else. Confusion, maybe, or unease. Zal leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Why carry something obsolete unless it does something we haven't seen before? Frelk shook his head. It's human sentiment. They carry old things because they like stories, nostalgia, ritual, or they found a way to weaponize history. That earned a pause. For all their arrogance, the Krivarn had learned never to fully underestimate humanity. The humans had bled for every inch they held. And sometimes in those bleeding inches they hid teeth. Back on the valley floor, the humans moved with growing urgency. The crate was opened, and reverent silence fell across the team. Mason approached it, ran his hand over the cold steel nestled within. It was ugly, big, blocky, and clearly outdated, but in the right hands, capable of miracles. He turned to the squad. This rifle was designed to punch holes through tanks when tanks were made of steel, not plasma fiber. It fires kinetic round the size of my forearm. And it doesn't care how smart your armor is if you're standing in the open. Rodriguez whistled low. Looks like it was built by someone angry at God. Mason chuckled. Maybe it was. He hoisted it with both hands, the rifle's weight anchoring him like an old promise. We only need one shot, one clean kill. Something that says, your rules don't work here. Not anymore. Yara adjusted her scope again, her tone more focused now. Movement on the ridge. They're sending a scout team. 2 drones and a pair of walkers. Good, Mason said. Let them come close. Let them get a good look. Above, the first drone banked low, sensor scanning and tagging heat signatures. Mason knew what they'd see. Tired infantry, makeshift gear, and a weapon that belonged in a museum. Nothing that screamed threat. He took a breath, exhaled slowly, and dropped into firing position. The anti-tank rifle locked against his shoulder with a satisfying click, and to the cracked old scope, he watched the alien walker's shielding shimmer faintly against the sun. He smiled. The old gods had not abandoned him. They had merely been waiting, and with the sound of thunderclap that rolled across the hills, humanity began to rewrite the rules. The blast cracked the silence of the valley like a celestial whip, echoing between the canyon walls and sending a flock of indigenous birds shrieking into the sky. The Ascendancy Scout Walker jerked mid-step as the projectile smashed into his knee joint, the armor folding inwards like soft clay. Sparks and synthetic muscle fibers exploded outward as the entire structure crumpled, throwing its pilot violently against the control canopy. The second walker froze, processing the data too late. Zal stood slowly from his position on the ridge, visor narrowed in disbelief. What in the abyss was that? Old human rifle, Frelk muttered, half in awe, half in confusion. Ballistic. It shouldn't have gotten through the shielding. Shielding doesn't mean much when projectile's mass does all the talking, Zal said, the words half-formed as he tried to reassemble his shattered sense of superiority. That wasn't a gun. That was a statement. Below, Mason reloaded the ancient rifle, his movements smooth, practiced. The weapon hissed slightly as it cooled from the kinetic discharge, the metal around the chamber blooming faintly red from the sheer friction of its output. Yara adjusted her position to cover him. I pressed at her scope. Second walker's hesitating, she reported. Drones are holding distance. Let them watch, Mason said, eyes scanning the upper ridge. We're not done speaking. Rodriguez crouched behind a low outcropping, watching the aliens react. They're freaked. That's the first time I've seen them not charge immediately. They were expecting a pattern, Mason replied, and we just handed them an anomaly. Yara tapped her earpiece. Command want an update. Tell them we've engaged. Tell them we got their attention. Mason's voice dropped, grim satisfaction leaking through. And tell them we brought the ghost of Stalingrad. Above, Zal turned toward the communication officer. Ping local command. I want a full scan on the humans' armaments. Something's off. They're too few to matter tactically, the officer protested. Zal's gaze sharpened. And yet one of them just disabled a walker with a museum piece. That is not nothing. As orders relayed across Ascendancy channels, the atmosphere among Zal's troops shifted. Confidence curdled into irritation. They weren't used to recalibrating expectations in the middle of an operation. The Krivarn way was precision, not improvisation. "They've got a sniper," Frau growled. "Probably modified the rounds. Maybe it's chemically enhanced." No signs of energy interference. That was raw, simple force. Too simple to detect. Zal clenched his fists. It's not just a shot, it's the message that comes with it. Back in the valley, the second walker finally began retreating, jets igniting to boost its bulk back to safety. Mason didn't fire. He didn't need to. The point had already embedded itself like shrapnel in the enemy's collective psyche. "They'll be calling reinforcements now," Yara said. "What's our move?" "We hold here. Let them send more. Every minute they hesitate is a minute our engineers mine the ridge." "You really think they'll step into that?" Rodriguez asked. "They won't have a choice," Mason answered. "We hit their ego. They'll respond big." In the shadow of scorched stones, the human squad moved like clockwork. No wasted movement, no unnecessary speech. They were few, but every soldier knew their place in the symphony. Their presence here wasn't about victory in the traditional sense. It was about creating noise in the machinery of the ascendancy, introducing doubt in a species not accustomed to second-guessing. Far above, Krivarn reinforcements screeched into the atmosphere, contrails staining the sky. Sleek dropships glided toward the valley, humming with suppressed aggression. Zal watched them coming with grim purpose. Let's see how far this relic of theirs can reach. As the enemy drew near, Mason repositioned behind another slab of rock. "You ready for more?" he asked Yara. "Always," she said. Her hands were steady, voice calm. "Rodriguez, get the decoys ready. We want them shooting shadows for the first minute." "On it, Captain." Explosions thundered in the distance, detonations rigged by their engineers to mimic heavy artillery placements. Smoke grenades deployed in sequence, blanketing the edge of the ridge in a fog of confusion. The dropships descended like vultures, unloading a fresh contingent of Krivarn infantry. Sleek armor glinting, plasma lances humming with dormant fury. And yet, they approached slower than usual, more cautiously. Uncertainty now walked beside them. Mason waited, watched, then he pulled the trigger again. Another thunderclap tore through the valley, and a Krivarn lieutenant disintegrated mid-stride. His energy shield flared once, blinked, and then failed spectacularly as a round ripped through his chest plate and exploded against a transport behind him. Panic rippled through the squad behind the fallen officer. "They're hesitating again," Yara whispered wonder in her voice. "They're adapting," Mason said. "But we only need them to adapt after the damage is done." Zal's voice roared through the Ascendancy squad comms. "Push forward. Their numbers are limited. Do not be paralyzed by illusion." But even as his command crackled through their helmets, his eyes betrayed doubt. These humans weren't attacking in volume. They weren't throwing bodies at defenses or relying on overwhelming firepower. They were doing something worse, leveraging precision, terror, and history. "They've turned an old rifle into a doctrine," Frout murmured. Zal didn't answer. He was too busy watching the next human round chamber into the weapon, its sound barely a whisper compared to the storm it promised. In that moment, Zal understood. This wasn't just about bullets and bodies. It was about perception. The humans had come not with a future, but with a fragment of the past, resharpened, repurposed, and now wielded it like prophecy. And worst of all, it was working. The sun dipped lower, casting blood-red shadows across the battlefield as the weight of the standoff grew heavier. The Krivarn reinforcements had secured the outer ridge, but their advance had stalled, not because they lacked firepower, but because they lacked certainty. Every step into the valley felt like walking into a hunter's blind. That a single outdated weapon could grind a technologically superior force to a halt was a bitter reality they could neither accept nor ignore. Zal paced a command outpost, his boots clicking against the polished alloy floor of the mobile unit. The holographic display before him flickered with movement trails, enemy positioning, environmental hazards. None of it explained the creeping dread gnawing at the edge of his mind. He paused, watching a simulation loop the sniper shot again, an impossible arc, a near-invisible trajectory, and a casualty that defied everything they had modeled about human capability. What's the tactical logic here? He muttered. Frelk, leaning against the console, scratched his chin fin thoughtfully. The logic is psychological. We've made ourselves predictable. They've made themselves terrifying. Zal scowled. They're ants with sharpened sticks. Sharpened sticks that took down 3 walkers for lieutenants and now an entire flank. The silence between them carried the weight of a recalibration. Somewhere along the line, humanity had stopped being underestimated and started being feared, and the transition had gone unnoticed until it was already well underway. In the valley below, Mason rotated his shoulder, feeling the bruise deepen with every shot. The anti-tank rifle wasn't built with ergonomics in mind, and each trigger pull felt like catching a train in the chest. But the effect it had, on both the enemy and his own troops, was worth every fracture it threatened to leave behind. Rodriguez checked their remaining rounds. 6 left. After that, we're back to standard gear. Mason nodded. We won't need 6. Yara adjusted her earpiece and squinted through the dense dusk air. Movement again. They're regrouping in squads of 10. Looks like staggered leapfrogging. No more direct charges. Smart, Mason said. They're starting to treat us like equals. Rodriguez gave a dry chuckle. Is that a compliment or a warning? Both. The team repositioned once more, using the terrain's jagged bones to their advantage. Heat haze danced along the horizon as the first Krivarn team crept forward, their armor active with adaptive camouflage. But Mason wasn't looking for movement. He was looking for patterns. The slightest shimmer, a shadow that didn't belong. He found one. He fired. This time, the round caught a soldier mid-leap, not only disabling the unit, but flattening the small ridge behind him. The force of the kinetic impact turned rock to vapor and sent shrapnel raining across the field. Mason exhaled slowly, ignoring the pain snaking through his rib cage. 5 left, Rodriguez muttered. Yara whispered. That one was a squad leader. They're pulling back again. The battlefield quieted for a moment, then the sky darkened. From the north, a new sound emerged, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the ground. It wasn't dropships or walkers. It was heavier, older, a war engine. Zal's voice, sharp and composed, crackled through every ascendancy comm. Deploy the Vardak. Full charge. The humans didn't recognize the name, but they didn't need to. The Earth itself told them something monstrous approached. Within minutes, it came into view, a behemoth of war forged from Krivarn dread and arrogance. The Vardak wasn't subtle. It was a crawling fortress, plated in reflective shielding and bristling with energy cannons capable of melting bunkers into glass. Its steps broke the silence like godly proclamations, each one accompanied by seismic groans from the abused Earth. Mason dropped behind cover, heart pounding. They're done playing. Rodriguez stared wide-eyed. That thing could level the ridge. Yeah, Mason said, gripping the rifle tighter, and we're going to punch a hole in it. Yara's breath hitched. Sir, even if we hit it dead center, that armor's layered. It's made to withstand orbital strikes. I know. That's why we're not going for the center. He knelt beside her and pointed at the screen displaying the enemy unit's slow advance. See that exposed vent cluster? Back left quadrant. Probably for cooling the fusion rotors. One shot there, chain reaction. Rodriguez frowned. That's a hell of a gamble. It's not a gamble, Mason said. It's a message, just louder than before. The Vardak loomed closer, its silhouette now fully emerged from the smoke. Krivarn troops marched behind it, emboldened by its presence. Fear had transformed into certainty again. The scales had begun to tip. Mason braced the rifle one last time, Yara assisting with stabilization. Sweat pooled down his back, despite the cool wind, and his fingers curled around the trigger like a prayer. Everything slowed. Noise dropped. The wind held its breath, and time narrowed to a single point. He fired. The recoil sent him sprawling backward, the rifle clanging beside him. The air ruptured with the shot's velocity, and the round tore through the field like vengeance manifest. It struck the Vardak's left rear quadrant exactly where intended. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the war engine groaned. A low-pitched whine built into a shriek as internal systems collapsed inward, The vent cluster exploded inwards, flames belching from seams designed never to open. Secondary detonations ripped through its spine. The mighty Vardak tilted forward, balance failing, and toppled with an earth-shaking crash. Silence returned, and then, like an avalanche of disbelief, the Krivarn began to fall back. Mason coughed, vision swimming, ears ringing. Did it fall? Yara knelt beside him, a stunned smile breaking through the dust. It fell. Above, Zal watched from the command ridge. The sight of the Vardak, his army's pride, burning in the valley below was a weight he hadn't known he could feel. For the first time in his long military career, he couldn't speak. Frelk didn't look at him. He didn't need to. They didn't just bring a rifle, he said quietly. They brought a reckoning. The night after the fall of the Vardak wrapped the valley in a strange hush, as if even the stars held their breath. Smoke drifted in long, slow curls over shattered terrain, where chunks of alloy and scorched soil marked the site of a myth undone. It wasn't just a battlefield now, it was a scar, a memory, a warning written in wreckage. Mason sat quietly against a jagged outcrop, cradling the anti-tank rifle across his lap. The recoil had taken its toll. His shoulder was swollen, the bone beneath protesting with every breath. But he wasn't thinking about the pain. His eyes were locked on the distant silhouette of the downed war engine. It looked smaller now, less like a god, more like a corpse. Around him, the team moved like shadows. Yara scanned the surrounding terrain, her rifle resting steady on the rise. Rodriguez was checking the comms, confirming extraction protocols with command. There was movement from the ridge, but no approach. The Krivarn were watching, stunned into stillness. They haven't pulled out yet, Yara murmured. They're recalibrating, Mason replied, trying to rewrite what they just saw. Rodriguez walked over with a cracked canteen and handed it to Mason. Command's patching through a full debrief request. Evac in 20. Might want to figure out what story you're going to tell them. I'm going to tell them the truth, Mason said. He took a slow sip of water. One rifle, one ridge, one lesson. Rodriguez gave a low whistle. They'll turn it into a recruitment ad. Let them, Mason said. We need more soldiers who believe they matter. Yara glanced up from her scope. You know, they'll come back with something bigger, something worse. I know, Mason said, adjusting the strap on the rifle, but they'll think twice first. Across the battlefield, Zal stood rigid in his command post, staring at the smoking remains of the Vardak. Officers murmured around him, voices strained with disbelief. The calculations hadn't accounted for this. None of their simulations had included a scenario where a single human with an ancient weapon could turn the tide. How? One of the junior strategists whispered. That rifle shouldn't have penetrated that armor. It didn't penetrate, Frelk said, arms crossed. It exploited. They aimed for the cooling cluster. Overpressure and plasma inversion took care of the rest. Another officer shook her head. We assumed they wouldn't understand our tech. They didn't need to understand it, Zal said quietly. They just needed to know where it could bleed. A thick silence followed. For all their superior firepower, the Krivarn have forgotten a critical truth. No system is flawless. And when you believe yourself unchallengeable, you stop guarding your flaws. Frelk stepped closer to the viewport, watching the human team gathering below. They fought with scraps, outnumbered, outgunned, and they still made us hesitate. That's not just resistance. Commander, that's strategy. Zal clenched his jaw. It's humiliation. It's history, Frelk corrected. Theirs and now ours. In the valley, Mason stood slowly, every movement stiff with fatigue. He slung the rifle onto his back, its worn strap digging into his bruised shoulder. The weapon felt heavier now, but not just from metal. It was heavy with meaning. Yara rose beside him, giving him a once-over. You're sure you can carry that all the way to the evac point? I didn't bring it all this way to drop it now. Rodriguez adjusted his pack, pausing to look up at the ridgeline, still watching us. Good, Mason said. Let them remember what they saw. The three of them began walking toward the evac site, boots crunching over cracked stone and shattered plating. No one spoke for a while. The wind had returned, carrying the scent of ozone and scorched circuitry. Above, the faint roar of engines grew louder. The dropship descended like a ghost, its massive turbines slicing through the smoke. Dust kicked up in spirals as its landing gear touched down. A hatch hissed open, and medics spilled out, flanked by armored escorts. Orders crackled over radios. There was movement, but no panic. Not now. Mason looked back once before stepping onto the ramp. The ridge loomed behind them, still filled with eyes. But there was no fire, no second assault. "They're holding back," Yara said. "They're regrouping," Rodriguez added. "They're rethinking," Mason finished. And that's all we needed. The ramp sealed behind them with a final hiss, and the dropship lifted into the night sky. Below, the battlefield began to fade into a blur of memory and smoke. Zhao remained at his command center, watching the human vessel rise and disappear. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, it was almost himself. They fought like they had nothing left to lose. "No," Frelk said. "They fought like they refused to lose." Zhao turned, eyes dark with realization. "And next time, they won't be underestimated." Frelk nodded. "That's what frightens me." Mason slumped into a seat inside the ship, letting the adrenaline bleed away. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from release. The mission was over. The damage was done. But the impact, that was just beginning. He looked at the rifle one more time. Its barrel blackened. Its was chipped and scorched. It had no electronics, no AI, no targeting system. Just precision, power, and patience. "I think they're going to start telling stories about this thing," Rodriguez said, settling across from him. "They should," Mason replied. "Not because it's special, but because it proved we are." Yara closed her eyes as the ship broke atmosphere. "What do you think the Krivarn will call this battle?" Mason thought for a long moment, watching stars bloom outside the viewport. The one they almost won. The ship vanished into the dark, carried with a rifle, a memory, and a new legend that would echo far louder than any war engine.